Okay, welcome everyone. I'm Andrew Stuck. I'm one of the co-producers of Walk, Listen, Create, which is, to you who don't know this, we're a social enterprise and not for profit. What we'd like to encourage the new people on this event is that you register and tell us all about yourselves and what work you're making, especially if it has a link to walking art. That's what we're kind of into more than anything. But we also support walking writers and walking journalists and all sorts of walking people. The other news is that this is an event for the Urban Tree Festival, which is an annual event. It's been running since 2018. It's run by mostly by volunteers. Occasionally, someone pops up who's actually getting a fee, but not very often. Anyway, the good news is Marlene is flying the flag. What's going to happen is I'm going to hand over to Marlene very shortly, but first I'm going to introduce her. I'm going to read the biography she's put on her profile on the Walk, Listen, Create website. So just bear with us. Marlene Creates is an environmental artist who lives in a 6-acre patch of old-growth boreal forest traversed by the Blast Hole Pond River in Portugal Cove, Newfoundland, Canada. She calls this site in the Boreal Poetry Garden, and it has been her focus has been the focus of her work since 2002. Between 2005 and 19, she held over 40 multidisciplinary collaborative guided walks in the boreal forest, which were attended by over 900 people. In 2022-24, about 300 local elementary school children came for guided walks, which included other multidisciplinary artists performing for them, followed by memory map drawing workshops. For over 45 years, her art has been an exploration of the reciprocal relationships between human experience, memory, language, and the land. Her work has been presented in over 350 exhibitions and is on show at the moment in Toronto. She's going to tell us a bit more about that later. And it's been screened across Canada and internationally. She's curated several exhibitions. I know this because, I went to the Banff Centre in the Rockies, and I discovered Marlene Creates' name. I was rustling around. There we go. So I know she's curated several exhibitions. She's worked in artist-run centres and taught visual arts at colleges and universities. She's been a guest lecturer and keynote speaker at over 250 institutions and conferences across Canada and abroad, including Chile, Italy, the UK, and the USA, and among them the National Gallery of Canada, the Glasgow School of Art, the University of Oxford, the University of Hartford, the Edinburgh College of Art, and the universities of Turin, Venice, and Siena. Marlene was elected to the Royal Canadian Academy of Arts in 2001. In 2019, she received the Governor General's Award in Visual and Media Arts for Lifetime Artistic Achievement. And in 2021, she was named to the Order of Newfoundland and Labrador. And in 2024, she received an Honorary Doctor of Letters from Memorial University. I think we're pretty pleased and proud to have you on. So, Marlene, I'm going to hand over to you.
The title of my talk, 24 years in a patch of old-growth boreal forest in 24 minutes or so. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you very much for inviting me to do this presentation for the Urban Tree Festival. I think it's a brilliant idea, this festival, and as I understand it, it was actually Andrew who invented this festival. And I'm surprised and delighted to see that it's now taking place all over the UK. I'm speaking to you from the boreal forest where I live on the island of Newfoundland, known as Uktahumguk before European settlement. This is the indigenous Mi'kmaq name for the island. It's the name in the upper left-hand corner, starting with the letter K. It means land across the water. The rest of the map indicates Mi'kmaq place names. The land is the closest point in North America to Europe, and consequently has had European settlers. Some Norse sailed here from Greenland around the year 1000, but they only stayed for 2 years. That says something about our weather. In 2002, I moved from this dark green townhouse built in 1893 in downtown St. John's, which is the provincial capital, to this contemporary open plan house surrounded by old growth boreal forest. Since moving here, this 6-acre patch of boreal forest where I live has become my studio, the source of my subject matter, and the platform for public multidisciplinary events. I'm not an artist who goes into a studio and makes things. I've worked outside for over 45 years. I call it the boreal poetry. So boreal, it simply means northern, as in aurora borealis, the northern lights. The word comes from Boreas, who was the Greek god of the north wind. The boreal forest is the world's largest ecosystem. It makes a circumpolar ring around the crown of the planet, and it's dominated by coniferous trees. It's the green area on this map. There's even some boreal forest in the UK, in the Scottish Highlands, where it's known as the Caledonian Forest, which is an ancient ecosystem of Scots pine woodlands that began establishing itself around 9,000 to 10,000 years ago after the end of the last ice age. Unfortunately, only remnants of it currently exist. Only about 1 to 2% of it. According to the Cairngorms National Park, these remnants represent an unbroken chain of 9,000 years of natural evolution. There are restoration efforts underway to reconnect these ancient fragments. I live on Blasthole Pond Road in a town called Portugal Cove, which is on the outskirts of the city of St. John's. As I said, that's the capital city of the province. Uh-oh, frozen up again. Oh, now I'm using the arrow. So this is my house in the boreal forest. This is the window behind me. So you can see the trees come right up to the house, which is now a big worry because of all the forest wildfires that we have. You may think this site would not qualify for an urban tree festival, but I'm actually within the municipal boundaries of the town of Portugal Cove. So this is the main series of photographs that I want to present. Larch, spruce, fir, birch, hand. Larch is our local term for what's also known as tamarack on the mainland of Canada. My greatest aspirations as an artist are presently constituted by this one place. I've been slowly tuning my body and my reflexes to its details. These black and white photographs are from a project that spans 19 years. It's a series of photographs about some of the trees in the forest where I live. When I place my hand on a tree, it's a greeting of one being to another. These are trees that I've individuated. I'm interested in the particularity of each tree and the circumstances that bring me to differentiate certain trees amongst the thousands in this particular patch of boreal forest. When I first moved here 24 years ago, the forest was an indistinct blur of various vegetation until I started spending time and becoming familiar with it. I'm getting to know this place, one wildflower, one boulder, and one tree at a time. But as I say, I will never live long enough to take it all in. Even when I'm being my most attentive, there are still many trees I have not yet noticed enough to remember as individuals. Between 2007 and 2015, I continued the series of photographs in black and white with about 9 trees that came to my attention each year. But what I should say is my attention came to them. So this is an installation of 18 excerpts from the 81 trees on which I photographed my hand in black and white between 2007 and 2015. In 2018, I started rephotographing on the same trees I had photographed in 2007 after an 11-year interval. So this is exactly the same tree 11 years later. Changes can be seen in the trees themselves, the surrounding vegetation, and my age and hand. In 2008, in 2019, I rephotographed the ones from 2008, and so on. Each one 11 years after the first black and white photograph. And by the way, the black and white photography, I didn't have a digital camera in 2007 when I started this series. So all the black and white photographs were taken on actual film, and they were printed like in a darkroom. But since then, I got a digital camera, and so the reprise, let's call them, are in color. And I like the fact that the black and white gives a sense of the past. I continued each year until January of this year. In this one, you can see how the fir trees have grown up around this pair of birch. To complete the series in time for a publication deadline, I had to rephotograph my hand in January on the last ones that were photographed in 2015. You can see how red my hand is. 12 of the trees on which I originally photographed my hand have been blown down in hurricanes and other severe windstorms. In those instances, I just photographed my hand in the empty spaces where the trees used to be. 9 pairs from the series are in an exhibition in Toronto that just opened on May 1st. And the exhibition also includes a selection of other work that I've done in the boreal forest here over the past 24 years. The complete series of 154 photographs in this series, Larch, Spruce, Fir, Birch, Hand, has just been published, and it was launched at the opening of my exhibition. It's not the first time I photographed my hand touching the surface of a series of upright entities. The series with the trees that I did harkens back to one I did 40 years ago, a hand to standing stones in Scotland, 1983. When I photographed my hand on ancient standing stones on various islands of the Scottish Outer Hebrides, it was a trip I made where I visited 9 of the Scottish islands and photographed my hand on 22 standing stones. Most of them were single stones in remote sites that were not even signposted. And consequently, they did not receive much attention. And this is what saved their lichens. Look at the lichens covering this standing stone. After visiting several standing stones that were thickly covered in lichen, I arrived at the Callanish stones on the Isle of Lewis. This megalithic site predates Stonehenge by about 2,000 years. I was startled by how far the stones were, considering they have been standing there for about 5,000 years. At some point before 1983, which is when I was there, a misguided decision had been made to strip the lichens off the stones. One source says the stones were sandblasted in the 1970s. And someone who visited the Callanish stones last year has told me that after 50 years, there is new lichen growing. From my point of view, the lichens speak of the ages and thousands of years since the stones were put in place. Though lichen do break down rock surfaces and convert rock into soil over long periods of time, studies have found that water can cause the most erosion, but lichens offer a protective barrier against rain and wind. So my hand rested on a starkly bare standing stone. It felt as if it was brand new, not that it had been standing there for about 5,000 years. But surely their antiquity is exactly what contributes to the mysterious allure of these stones. Unfortunately, lichens are one of the ways to date when the stones were put in place because they can live for thousands of years. They're incredibly slow growing. There is a species of lichen in the Arctic that has been dated to be over 8,000 years old, and it's considered to be the world's oldest living organism. I'll just show you the installation view of the series of black and white photographs of my young hand on 22 standing stones on the Outer Hebrides in 1983. In the early 1980s, I made several trips to visit ancient standing stones and stone circles in England, Ireland, and Scotland. And I traveled around on this 1968 Vespa motor scooter with my camera and camping gear strapped to it. I put this picture in especially for Andrew. Perhaps he will tell you later why that is. All right, so back to the Urban Tree Forest. Urban Tree Festival. A forest is more than its trees, of course. This brings me, talking about the standing stones and the lichen, this brings me to lichen on trees, where they are very common. Lichen is very common on trees. And each lichen is a small ecosystem. It's an organism formed from a symbiotic relationship between an algae, a fungus, and sometimes a yeast. Species of lichen vary in relation to their position up and down tree trunks, as well as on branches. A lichenologist who came to my place a few years ago examined a branch that was covered with lichen. Without even using a microscope, she identified at least half a dozen species just on that one branch. Lichens are an indicator of air pollution. And I understand they're returning to trees in London. Here we go. This is the connection with the Urban Tree Festival. Lichen are returning to trees in London because the air quality has improved since the 1980s. And I was in London last May, and I was amazed to see so many people getting around on electric scooters and bicycles. If you're in a car, you probably don't appreciate it, but I thought it was wonderful. Unfortunately, when lichen grow on trees, their lifespan is determined by the lifespan of the trees, unlike lichen growing on rock. In September 2010, Hurricane Igor hit Newfoundland, and it felled quite a lot of trees at my place. As a way to turn the loss into something, I made an artwork titled "Our Lives Concurrent for 58 Years Until the Hurricane." The hour, O-U-R, in the title refers to me and the trees because I was 58 years old at the time, and all of these fallen trees had been standing throughout my lifetime. I learned the age of the fallen trees because I had the assistance of an ecologist from Memorial University, Andrew Trant. I gave him the cross sections of 22 spruce and fir tree trunks that had been felled by the hurricane, and he dated the trees using a very powerful microscope. When I installed this work, the cross sections are arranged according to my sense of their positions in the forest. So it's kind of a memory map of where my sense is the trees were in this forest. And the installation also includes a key on the wall showing the age of each tree when it was the other part of the project is I installed markers beside the stumps that indicate the age of each tree when it was blown down. This is one of the stumps and the cross section of that tree. It was 96 years old when it was blown over. The significant thing to remember is it was 9 inches in diameter at its widest point. This one was 108 years old, yet it was only 3 inches in diameter. It turned out, and this was the greatest revelation from doing this project, because I always thought the larger the diameter, the older the tree. But the diameters of the trees were not relative to their ages at all. The biggest trees are not the oldest in this ecosystem. I photographed both of these cross sections on a 1-foot square floor tile so you can see their relative sizes. So this is the one that's 9 inches across at its widest. It was 96 years old. And this is the one that was 108 years old, which is only 3 inches in diameter. This tree was growing on a height of land where it was quite exposed and the soil was very thin. So it took the tree 108 years just to grow 3 inches in diameter. Its location, location, location. The poor tree can't move itself to a better, more favorable site. The ecologist with the powerful microscope who dated the trees for me had been doing research on spruce trees in northern Labrador that were growing at the edge of the permafrost. He found small spruce trees, not even his height, and less than 1 inch in diameter, that were up to 400 years old. Such trees may grow an annual ring that is only 1 cell thick. 1 cell. Hence, he had a power. The stump of the birch was 96 years old when it was blown down in 2010 in Hurricane Igor. And on the right, the same stump 14 years later. I learned from Louise Hermanutz, a conservation biologist, that balsam fir seedlings are very patient. They may look like they're only a couple of years old, little seedlings like this, but she told me they can sit in suspended animation for decades, up to 70 years, Louise said, waiting for light. So when the large tree was blown down, the canopy opened up overhead, and the seedlings are finally getting their day in the sun. So on the left is the stump of a tree that was over 79 years in 2010. And on the right, the same stump 9 years later covered with twin flowers. Now, Andrew Trent was only able to determine that it was over 79 years old because the tree had heart rot, which is a fungus that gets into the tree. And as you can see, it ate the middle core of the tree out. So he's only able to count 79 rings. Twin flower. It's a low-growing trailing perennial with pairs of pale pink, bell-shaped flowers that dangle from little stems. Carl Linnaeus. He was the Swedish biologist who developed the Latin nomenclature in the 1700s for naming organisms. He was asked which plant he would like to carry his name. He chose this modest little twin flower, whose Latin name is Linnea borealis, because it grows in the boreal forest from Siberia to Sweden and across North America. You will see this tiny flower in any portraits that were painted of Carl Linnaeus. I'd like to conclude with a quote by the poet Larch Auden. A culture is no better than its woods.
Terrific. Thank you so much. That's really lovely. I thought it shows discipline and patience and determination to carry out the photographs over and over again to go back to find those trees. I'm quite intrigued. How far were each of the trees that you individuated, I think you call it, identified as individuals? How far are they from your base camp?
Oh, they're not far. I mean, they're all within the 6 acres around the house. But the boreal forest extends beyond what would be called my property, which I hate that word because how can you own, trees? Um, yeah, I'm at the edge of an over 900-acre conservation area that I helped develop because it's all old growth boreal forest.
I guess it's good afternoon for you, Marlene. I'm in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. One of the things I'd like you to reflect on with us is the fact that your body also was changing. Your hand was changing, your body, your experience of the place you're walking through has also changed.
Yes, and some of the changes are more visible since I'm a visual artist. Some of the changes are more visible than others. For example, I was surprised. Okay, I'm going to tell you something. I was surprised at how little it seemed the trees had grown in 11 years, except for one tree, a larch tree. But it's downhill from my septic tank.
There you go.
It grew the most of any of the 77 trees that I documented over that 19 years. It grew the most.
So then you learned that in relationship to your body, the scale was a factor. Noticing that your hand had not changed size, but that your relationship with the tree had definitely changed in scale.
Yeah, well, that one in particular, I really noticed the growth, the width of the tree had grown significantly over the 11 years between the two photographs, but not so
Yes.
much in the other trees. But as I showed you, that one tree that was 108 years old was only 3 inches, so you wouldn't see in 1 year any change, or in 11 years
No,
any change in its growth. Yeah.
no. And the other question, because I'm exploring a practice that's similar to yours, which means that none of my friends see art being made because the research goes over such an expanse of time that you're kind of holding everybody up from really understanding what it is that you're doing. But I was curious. I have problems with actually relocating. I want you to talk more about your relationship with these. You said 9 trees a year, did you?
Yeah, that was the number that I was able to actually sort of grasp in my memory. Yeah.
Because then you could leave home and you could actually walk to these 9 that you understood where they were living.
Yes. And but the project is actually just about spending time in the forest and paying attention to the trees. That's what it's about, really. And
Mhm.
coming to see them as um well, individuals. Yeah. Of course, they're not individuals. They're all interconnected with the whole ecosystem.
But you're
Yeah.
not counting paces to get to them, or you're
No,
not
no.
saying, oh, it's on the right or it's on the left.
Okay. Well, when I first started this project, it was never part of my original intention to come back and revisit the trees after 11 years. That was completely circumstantial. But it turned out to be the key to this whole project, actually. Um, so when I did the first photographs, I just made a little note of whether it was a spruce or a fir, because it's hard to tell from the trunk when you just see the trunk, the species. So I made the birch, it's easy to tell, and the larch is easy to tell. So I just made a little note to myself which tree it was and where it was. And so when I came around 11 years later, I was so glad that I had those notes to
Mhm.
to be able to find the tree again. But a few of them, everything around had grown up so thick. A few of them I had to really struggle to even get at the tree. Yeah.
Mhm. Thank you. That's what I wanted to know.
Thank you, Kathleen.
So
I was just interested because I was looking at your picture that you showed with one of the two different time zones of the tree, and I was looking at the river underneath it that was flowing, and I was just interested in what other changes in the landscape you've observed. I mean, the flow of the river, has that changed? Is it decreased, increased, those sort of things?
Oh, the river is different every day, Jeanette. Well, last summer we had a drought and the river completely dried up. There was not even a trickle. So the riverbed became another path through the forest. I could just walk in the riverbed. There was not a trickle, not a sound. You could stand there and there was nothing, not a drop of water. And we had terrible forest fires. So living in the boreal forest used to be full of astonishments, and now it's full of worry because of the forest fires. We never had that before in Newfoundland. So the water level comes and goes. After a hurricane, it's overflowing its banks. It's a torrent, it just very, very changeable. It's the most dynamic point actually in this landscape is the river. I mean, it's actually a stream, but the official name on it is the Blast Hole Pond River.
And have there been changes in the sort of plants that grow? I mean, you talked about how when a tree falls down and there's more light coming through, and there are seeds that start growing and things. Are there other changes in terms of the plant life or even the animal life, the creatures that live there?
Oh dear. Well, I have 3 trail cameras, like infrared trail cameras set up along the river, and I've been making work with the wildlife, the trail cameras. I've had those trail cameras there for more than 10 years, since 2015. And the amount of wildlife I capture on those trail cameras has gone right down. It's quite graphic, actually, the lack of wildlife that I've been capturing on the trail cameras. Mostly I used to get moose, but also in the winter snowshoe hares. I got a coyote once. I got a fox. I get various birds. But as I say, I hardly catch anything anymore. And besides the wildlife, you asked me about the plants. Well, plants are so slow growing. I mean, I kind of keep track of the wildflowers. I really love the wildflowers in the boreal forest. And a lot of them are perennials and they come back in the same spot every year. But I do notice when they start spreading and I find one that I haven't seen in a certain spot before. Yeah.
Thank you for the talk. It's very interesting. I'm not an expert, but I have a kind of dilettante touristic interest in temperate rainforest. I'm not familiar with the boreal forest at all. But I do remember going on a trip to Vancouver Island where the trees are massive. And I noticed that obviously because of, it's so much nearer the Arctic Circle, the boreal forest, you've got 100-year-old trees that are still actually quite small. What we were told for some of the forests that we went through on Vancouver Island was that there's very little of it that's original because so much of it was cut down by settlers to build stuff. So they have little reserves of ancient trees, very small ones, very small ancient reserves. And I just wondered whether the boreal forest is less damaged because perhaps it's less commercial, or whether the same phenomenon occurs with that. Thanks.
What I can tell you is a lot of the forest has been cut down for pulp and paper. It's not particularly good for lumber. Like pine trees are much better for lumber. So a lot has been cut down for pulp and paper and also for fuel, because when settlers first came here, in fact, some places never even got electricity until the 1960s. They had to burn wood for everything. They needed wood to build their houses. They needed wood if they wanted to have a cup of tea. They had to put a fire. So it's coming back because, well, pulp and paper is down. People are reading everything online. There's not as many newspapers getting printed. But there's also parts of the island that have become barrens. Now, they may have originally been barrens, or it may be because the trees were removed. And so they look like the tundra. There's no tree vegetation as such.
Yeah, I had a question. I'd read a couple of books, The Mother Tree, and I think there's another one just talking about forests as being communities, the hidden life of trees. And I
Right.
just wondered if you had any thoughts on that, about the idea that trees talk to each other or communicate with each other.
Oh, I think it's absolutely true. They communicate through the air. They also communicate underground through their fungal networks, the hyphae. They're actually, Hollywood has actually bought the film rights to make a Hollywood movie of Suzanne Simard's book, The Mother Tree. So I think that's great, because that means that this maybe specialized knowledge about the interconnection of trees will then become more well known.
Marlene, tell us a little bit more about the exhibition and the book.
Book has the complete series of photographs. So that's 77 pairs, 154 photographs. That's the complete series going right up to January this year. The reason I had to go photograph my hand in the winter in the snow in January was to meet there's the book, yeah, was to meet the publisher's deadline. And the last black and white photographs were taken in 2015, and I couldn't fudge it. It's just the kind of person I am. I couldn't take the ones that should have been taken in 2026 back in 2025 and pretend they were from 2026. So I had to go out in the winter and photograph my hand on the trees in the snow. But you know what? I kind of like, it's one of those circumstantial things where, in fact, I never would have thought of ever doing that on purpose, but I really like that the last images in the book are my hand on trees in the snow, because of course the boreal is all about the winter, the north. And so yeah, they only printed 100 copies of this book. I can't imagine why, but anyhow, so there's only, like Andrew said, the publisher only has 7 copies left after just 1 week. Oh well. Maybe they'll print it again.
Hi, Marlene. Thanks for your talk. I'm in London, and I grew up in Toronto, and I have been to St. John's. So I spent a lot of time in trees and forests as a child. And I know St. John's is right on the coast, and are you inland a little bit from the coast?
I am, yes.
Okay.
Well, Portugal Cove is on Conception Bay,
Okay.
which is the next bay from the Atlantic, and then I'm not right on the coast of Conception Bay. I'm up in the woods, but I'm not far from the
You're
bay.
not far. Okay.
Yeah.
Do you find that when you moved from St. John's, was it quite a drastic change to be surrounded in the forest versus, like, I grew up very close to the shore of Lake Ontario, so constant access to that big wide expanse, which is quite a different thing than being surrounded by the trees. Did that have massive changes on how you were working?
To tell you the truth, the main reason I left downtown St. John's was to get some silence, some peace and quiet.
Okay.
The downtown, we started getting cruise ships coming in, 3,000 and 4,000 people would offload.
Oh,
I was only 3 streets from the actual harbor where they dock.
yeah,
And we have all these rock festivals, outdoor rock festivals in the summer. And I just thought I was going to go crazy because there was way too much noise.
right. Okay.
It never occurred to me that I would end up using this place for my subject matter. But of course, once I got here, that's what happened. And oh, what was the core of your question again?
Well, it was the difference in, an expanse of being on the coast
Uh-huh.
versus being enclosed.
Yeah, well, I never have lived on the coast as such.
Okay.
So I was downtown, and there's almost no urban trees in downtown St.
Mhm.
John's,
Yeah.
not in the historic part where I was living.
Okay.
So, I mean, if you're going to go to all the trouble of moving, you might as well make a big change. So I moved from downtown St. John's, where the only property, let's say, was the footprint of the house. Like the front door just opens onto the sidewalk.
Yeah.
There's no yard or anything. So now I have this. I think it was the best thing I ever did in my life was move out here.
Wow, amazing. 'Cause
Um,
I'm thinking of leaving London for similar reasons.
You're in London, England, or
I
London,
am, yeah.
Ontario.
No, London, England.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, how can I answer that question? How did I start thinking about the boreal forest? Well, it's a subalpine ecosystem. And I remember going to Baffin Island up in the Canadian Arctic and really falling in love with the tundra. And that's actually where I met Louise in 1985. So we've known each other for over 40 years. Thank goodness she can't say anything because she'd probably kill me telling people that. Anyway, it just so happened we both ended up living in Newfoundland. Neither of us was living in Newfoundland at that time. And I loved the subalpine. I loved the vegetation. I loved the tundra. I loved the textures and the colors and everything. And Louise taught me, talking about trees, Louise and I walked across the tundra and she showed me a little twig about this big lying on the ground. She said, it's a willow tree. And she said it could be 200 years old. Now, she better put something in the chat if I'm saying something that's not correct. But anyhow, that's something I really remember being completely astonished over. And there's qualities about the boreal forest that remind me of that Arctic environment that I really relate to. Like I wouldn't be any good in a tropical forest. Oh, Louise says it was Arctic dwarf birch. Okay, I'm a good student, Louise, aren't I? Yeah, imagine that. A little twig horizontal on the ground because it's right on the permafrost, and it was like maybe up to 200 years old, only this big.
A big thank you, of course, to Marlene, and also for all of you for coming along and supporting her and the Urban Tree Festival. See you all soon. Bye-bye for now.
Thanks, everybody. It's great to see you.
Thank you so much,
Thank you
Marlene.
very much.